What is up, you guys? Diggerdan here, coming at you with another video. Today, I'm doing a book review on Star Wars: Heir to the Empire. Without further ado, let's dig into it. Now, this is the first book in the Thrawn Trilogy, written by Timothy Zahn. He's written a ton of Star Wars stuff back when it was Expanded Universe, before Star Wars bought the rights and made it Legend. To the fans, I would say a lot, like, this is kind of canon, even though it's not, because the events that happen here would take place after Episode 6. But then, of course, we have the Star Wars garbage films of 7, 8, 9, which in my mind, is it canon? But yeah, you guys can fight over that in the comments. Personally, I love the original trilogy. I remember growing up and watching them with my dad. Literally me laying down on the living room floor while he's in his lazy boy next to me, just watching Empire Strikes Back, just all the good ones. And then growing up when the prequels were getting released, I know I was the target audience. So again, you can argue with me in the comments, but Episode 3 honestly is probably my favorite out of the 6. Just because, yes, I know flashy lightsabers, a lot of CGI, whatever, but my little child brain thought it was the coolest thing I've ever seen, and I think that nostalgia can't break that. But anyway, so I grew up watching Star Wars and really enjoy, like, playing a lot of the video games, like on the PS2 when there was Battlefront and Battlefront 2, loving the crap out of those games. When when Episode 3, the video game, came out, that was really awesome. I remember doing 1v1 battles with my brothers and even my dad, where I was Anakin Skywalker and then they were another, like, Obi-Wan or General Grievous or whatever. And I remember beating them so much, so often. I remember, the game mechanics weren't amazing, but I remember it even got to the point where I could close my eyes. I remember this vividly. I was turned around from the screen, from the TV. My hands were behind my back with the controller, and my eyes were closed, and I was still beating them somehow. It was crazy. But yeah, you could literally be like General Grievous and Mace Windu and Anakin and Obi-Wan. And I remember if you both chose the same character, like if you both chose Anakin, for example, one would be blue lightsaber Anakin, the other one would be like evil red lightsaber Anakin. And then if you were both Obi-Wan, like this, like player 2 would be like green lightsaber, just so you can like visually tell the difference, so you don't get confused about who's who. Yeah, so I remember growing up very vividly with Star Wars, and I haven't read many of the novels, and the couple novels I have read, I didn't really care for. This was the first novel I actually started to really enjoy. I didn't love it. I'll just tell you the score outright. Overall, I did give it a 7.06. So it's still solid. Like, it's still above average, I would say. But I think there were a lot of plot points. I'll get into specifics later. But I think there were a lot of plot points that were just a little too convenient. Like, everyone just happened to be at the same place at the same time, even though they were all on their own little different journey. So it's like, it was, I think, too many convenient things for the sake of the plot, which is fine. But I think it maybe happened too often for me to not love it. So, but yeah, anyway, I chose this trilogy specifically to start. This was, if you guys watched my what I plan on reading for 2024 video, or like 5 series I plan on starting, this was one of those series. And I got this entire trilogy from a library used book sale for, like, I think less than $1 for the entire trilogy. It was awesome. I think it was like a $5 bag. You fill up the bag and you get it. So it was like, I think it ended up being like maybe 50 cents or 25 cents a bag, or a book from the bag. Regardless, I was really excited to get it, and I was excited to dig into it this week. So anyway, with all of that preface, with all that nostalgia just pouring out of me, let's start digging into what I like and don't like about Star Wars: Heir to the Empire. So I guess before I get into my more very specific thoughts and talk about spoiler stuff, the book itself takes place 5 years after the events of Episode 6, after the Battle of Endor, after the second Death Star gets destroyed by the Rebel Alliance, and then Palpatine and Lord Vader are both deceased, and then kind of the remaining Empire forces are kind of scrambling to figure out what to do. As the Rebel Alliance is gaining more and more support, and they now control Coruscant, which is basically the center of the galaxy, and now they're starting to put laws into place, and it's like they're basically they're forming their own form of government now, and starting to replace the Empire. But that's where Grand Admiral Thrawn comes in, where he still has a fleet of Empire ships, and there's still Empire-owned territory and planets, and so it's kind of what the fallout would look like after the events of Episode 6, which is very interesting because as a kid, when I watched Episode 6, like, yay, good guys won. That's it. End of story. But this actually goes into like, okay, yeah, the good guys won the day, but this is what the continued battle and the continued war really looks like, which I think is interesting because that's, again, something I never really thought about until I really picked up this book. And then also it kind of goes into more specific things like Luke's and Leia's relationship as brother and sister, and kind of those teased stuff we saw with Leia, like being able to sense Luke. So like her force powers kind of being harnessed a little more and starting to be trained. But also Leia and Han are finally married, and they have twins on the way, which is kind of funny in the Skywalker family. Luke and Leia are twins, and then Leia also now is going to have twins. So I just thought that was kind of funny. And yeah, so a lot of loving characters make a return, like Chewbacca, Han, Luke, Leia, obviously, and then Thrawn, and that's kind of it. I guess Lando Calrissian, and then outside of that, it's a lot of characters we haven't met before, or characters that are kind of been on the back burner, like Admiral Akbar and Mon Mothma, and that's really it. That's been in the movies. I think everybody else is new, I believe. So yeah, that's kind of overall the story where it starts. And yeah, so like I said, overall, I rated this as a 7.06. So it was very solid. I didn't love it, didn't dislike it. I would recommend it if you're a fan of Star Wars, or really, yeah, if you enjoyed the original trilogy and you felt like it was an incomplete story, I would definitely recommend this to you. But it's just like a casual reader who didn't really care for Star Wars, I don't think this would be for you. Because there's a lot of references and a lot of story points that wouldn't make sense if you didn't watch the original trilogy. Because I was even thinking, like, I haven't watched the original films in years, and there were even some story points that I had to really think. I'm like, oh yeah, that did happen, didn't it? Or does that make sense? Or things like that, where it's like sometimes I had trouble connecting the dots because I've been so disconnected from the films for so long. But yeah, so still a solid read, but I'd really only recommend it for Star Wars fans, honestly. The first category I like to rate out of my 5 categories is emotional impact. And for the book, I was going to say for the film, for the book, I rated emotional impact as a 6.9. Again, very solid, but there were some parts that I kind of rolled my eyes at a little bit. Like Leia, as we know, she's the princess of Alderaan, and now she's like General Leia, whatever. A lot of her parts are very politics heavy, and I know that's what a lot of people give the prequels crap for, is that, I mean, aside from the bad acting and just the over CGI stuff, like a lot of it focused on the politics, and for a lot of people that was very boring. And I agree. The politics is easily the worst part, but it makes sense. You kind of have to have the politics there to move the story forward. So like those sections where it was like just focused on politics and kind of laying the groundwork for the story, I'm like, all right, let's move on. Let's see the story progress. So that kind of took me out of it a little bit. But then when we were with Grand Admiral Thrawn, and kind of saw how he's very analytical and like very ruthless, but he's very calm. Like, it's just very polar opposite of, not completely polar opposite, but very the opposite side of the same coin of like Darth Vader. Like Darth Vader, he's very menacing, he's very strong, but he like had a temper and he would lose it very quickly. Where Thrawn, he can have a temper and he can be very ruthless, but he's usually very, very calm, and he's in control of himself, and he's usually in control of everything around him. And when things he doesn't have control of, that's when he loses it. And that, in my opinion, makes him really menacing. So in my opinion, when we were following Thrawn, that was kind of the best parts of the book. And I almost caught myself rooting for Thrawn in some of these scenes as well, where it's like, Luke, you're fine. You don't need to be free. Just let Thrawn capture you or whatever, you know. Where then I was like catching myself, I'm like, no, he's the bad guy. Come on, Daniel. But like Thrawn is just, in my opinion, that good of a character. So again, I know I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm not really talking about characters yet, but that kept me emotionally invested when I was reading Thrawn's story. Something that I did kind of mention that I thought was really interesting was, again, Luke's and Leia's relationship, with Luke being the Jedi Master, which I don't know if he's technically a master yet, but him being the teacher, and then Leia being the Padawan, even though they never actually say she's a Padawan, so whatever. And then Leia finally gets her lightsaber, and she's starting to train. Although, something that bothered me, and I have to mention this now before I forget, is that we know that Luke's lightsaber is green, right? Because obviously the cover, if you watch the films, or watch film 6, and even in a couple of the scenes, it talks about, oh, the green light. In any scene with Leia's lightsaber, they never mention the color. So I don't know if that's just, oh, let your imagination go. Is it blue? Is it green? Is it whatever? You can probably assume it's blue because that's the most popular color, but it never actually says. I like to think it's blue, but I don't know. Again, that's just kind of nitpicky stuff, but that kind of bothers me. It's like, that's kind of the most iconic thing. There was even a scene where she was using the lightsaber to illuminate the room around her because it was the middle of the night. And it never says, oh, the blue light, oh, the green light, oh, the whatever colored light. It just says the light. It's like, come on, but it's not white light, so it's not like it's date, you know? I know, I'm going way more into it than I should be, but that kind of bothered me a little bit. Next thing I like to rate is characters. I rated this as a 7.5. This is actually the highest rated thing I have. Again, I loved Grand Admiral Thrawn. He was very menacing. He's very much a tacticianist. So I loved following him. And then we were introduced to a new head of a new crime boss that basically took over Jabba the Hutt's territory. I forget his name. It was like Karad or Karad. I don't know. I'll flash it here on the screen. But he was kind of cool. But then also we are introduced to another new character called Mara Jade, who hates Luke for some reason, which we don't really know until basically like the last 75 pages of the book, which in my opinion are kind of weak reasons, but whatever. So she was kind of menacing. She is very mysterious, kind of until towards the end. I mean, even with what's revealed in this first book, she's still pretty mysterious. But she's described as having very bright red fiery hair, very vibrant green eyes, and she's very graceful and very she's also kind of a tacticianist, I'll say, even though I know I said it's the wrong word. Similar to Thrawn, but maybe not on the same level of Thrawn. She notices the small details. It's kind of hinted that she can use the Force, or she's Force sensitive. So I think that's really interesting, and I think maybe we'll see her kind of grow that with Luke, because it seems like even though she hates him as of the end of this book, she seems to be starting to grow in trust with him. And I could be wrong, but I think I've heard years ago that her and Luke get married, I think. I don't know if I'm making that up, if that was a fever dream, or if that's something that somebody told me and that happened in this trilogy, and I just spoiled that for myself. And I don't know. But then there was a couple scenes where she had Luke's lightsaber, where Luke was her prisoner, or however it was. And she was using the lightsaber, and Luke noticed that she seemed like she's used the lightsaber before. She was very graceful with her strokes, very accurate and very intentional with it. So it seems like she's had lightsaber training in the past, which again makes me think that she's Force sensitive as well. And because the thing that makes her hate Luke is that Luke survived and killed Jabba, or took out Jabba and freed her friends, or his friends, where Mara Jade's role was apparently she was the hand of Emperor Palpatine, and Palpatine was trying to kill Luke, it's said, but even though in the films he was trying to recruit Luke. That's kind of addressed. But Mara's oh, well, he wasn't really trying to recruit you. That was only after the fact that the assassination attempt failed. It's oh, okay, whatever. So, again, some things that maybe are a little too convenient, maybe a little retconny, if you will. But I get it. Sometimes you have to have little retcon things like that in order to introduce new characters, new story points, more plot, more excitement, more things to move forward, right? So it kind of makes sense a little bit, but I don't know. It was a little hard for me to buy into. But I do like Mara Jade as a character, and I'm more excited to see her in the continuation of the trilogy. Yeah, and that was kind of it. There was a new counselor for the Alliance, or the Rebel Alliance. I forget what the government actually calls themselves now. He was like basically an annoying alien. I forget his name. It's weird. I'll flash it here again. I don't even know how to pronounce that. Who is basically Admiral Akbar's rival. And it seems like everybody on the council except Mon Mothma, the Chancellor, I think is what she is. Everyone except her doesn't like this guy. So how is he still on the council? I don't know. Why does he have so much political sway? I don't know. Honestly, I don't care. The politics are the most annoying, boring part. So he's annoying, but we don't see too much of him. It seems like, based off the way it ends, saying that Admiral Akbar is arrested for treason, we'll probably see more of that annoying counselor in the future. So looking forward to that. Yeah, so characters overall still very high, but some of them I didn't really care for. One last character I forgot to mention is Sabath, or Cbaoth, who can use the Force. He's somebody that Grand Admiral Thrawn discovered following some old Emperor Palpatine rumors, whatever. Who claims is a Jedi Master, but when he first meets Thrawn, he throws Force lightning at him. So is he a evil Force user, or dark Force user, good Force user, or is he kind of like Mace Windu, where he's got the balance of the both? I don't know, because we never see his lightsaber. We never actually. Now that I think about it, they never actually mention he has one. He just mentions the Force use. So he's a very interesting character. He seems to be similar to kind of like the Obi-Wan Kenobi, whereas he's the mentor. But currently Kabath is under Thrawn's wing. But Thrawn convinced him to be with Thrawn by convincing Kabath that he will eventually get Luke and Leia, and then Kabath can have Luke and Leia, who are kind of understood as the only two Force users known in the universe, or the galaxy at least, outside of Kabath. But he's a completely new character, and I think, I could be wrong, but not on this version obviously, but I think on the original print, or on the original mass market paperback, Kabath is a very long white beard, kind of classic wizard robes. I'm gonna flash that here on the screen if I can find that. And that's literally what he looks like. That's literally how he's described. So I think that's actually pretty funny and accurate. Because sometimes the covers are way inaccurate. I could be wrong, but I believe with the Dresden files, Dresden himself, he's wearing a hat on the covers, and the covers are kind of known as being atrocious. But again, as the character, I believe he dislikes hats, and he doesn't like wearing hats. So the fact that he's always in a hat on the cover, I just think is hilarious. If that is true, I haven't read any of the Dresden. It's just what I've heard. So anyway, that's just a fun little tidbit, and I'm getting off track. But yeah, characters 7.5. Now with plot, this is the lowest rated thing I have, and that is a 6.5. Again, it's serviceable. It basically is a reason for the characters to get together and interact. And it feels like a little bit of manufactured opposition, I'll say, or little manufactured conflict. Again, with that annoying counselor, who basically pitted up against Admiral Akbar and kind of causing political tension when there's still empire tension that they're trying to eradicate. I think that's silly. Again, I think it kind of makes sense. Obviously, when you're forming a new government, not everyone's going to be there's going to be people at odds with each other. Not everyone's going to be on the same page. But again, I just think the way it's done, I think, is a little tongue-in-cheek. I think it's a little much when it's really you should be focusing on the big bad instead of making a political big bet. I don't know. I don't like that aspect. And then also for the climax, towards the end of the book, like they all meet up at the same shipyard. Like that's what Admiral Thrawn has been like working towards. He's been stealing, or he stole a bunch of Lando Calrissian's like mining ships to have this big payoff. It's like, okay, that makes sense. That's kind of teased as that's what he's going to be doing. But then just the fact that Han Solo and Luke like both end up happening to be there after the conflict of the planet they just left, I think is a little too convenient. And again, I think even getting to that planet, I think is a little too convenient, where it's like they were on separate paths and then they converged together. It's just there's a lot of things that are too consistent, I think, or too convenient is the word. But again, I think it kind of makes sense for pushing the plot along and making conflict happen. I do think that does make sense. And it was still interesting. It was like those parts were still way more interesting than Leia. Sorry, and nothing against Leia, but just like her being the politician is just happens to be the most boring parts. So yeah, it's not the best, but for what it is, like it gave us something to read where the characters are together and causing conflict. So I guess it's all right. Next is dialogue and prose. This is just a solid 7. Nothing crazy, nothing terrible. There was only like one egregious typo that I noticed, and that's when, and it might even just be this edition, I'm not sure, but it was when Luke was talking to Han and Mara Jade, and like their names were listed, but their names weren't capitalized. It was like Han, lowercase Han, and then Mara, lowercase Mara. Again, that's very little nitpicky things, but it did take me out of it. I'm like, wait, why is Han not capitalized? And then I kept reading in the line, and then it was Mara uncapitalized. I'm like, why is her name not capitalized either? I'm so confused. But again, and then it was like the next couple lines, it's like Han, capitalized Han, H. Like, okay, whatever. It's clearly a typo. And then the dialogue itself, it's serviceable. You got that classic Han Solo quips, Lando Calrissian quips, which I think is interesting or funny. But then something that I thought, again, for convenience sake happened, but when Leia is just her and Chewbacca on Kashyyyk, where it's a planet of just Wookiees. I was going to say woolies. That's not what they are. On a planet of just Wookiees, and she has a hard enough time understanding what Chewbacca is saying, and then she meets a new Wookiee, and then the Wookiee has a speech impediment, so it makes it easier for Leia to understand. I just thought that was really funny because, of course, C-3PO couldn't be there because he was on a different mission for doing something else. And he's, of course, always the translator as the protocol droid. He has, 7 million different languages he can speak. So, I thought that was just too convenient. But I guess it makes sense. Like, the story has to happen. Like, there has to have conversations that occur. So, whatever. I'll take it tongue-in-cheek, but I just thought that was a little too convenient. And then the last thing I like to rate is world building, and this is the second highest thing I rated, and that is a 7.4. Star Wars is really cool where it's got the Force, right? It's basically space magic. And so we explore a little bit more of the Force. It's not on this cover, but I know there's a lot of pictures on the internet with Thrawn having like this basically really big lizard around his neck. And I forget what those are called. They're like yai. It starts with a Y, but it's basically salamanders is the word. Again, I'll flash it here on the screen. But those creatures basically create a bubble around themselves where it inhibits the use of the Force. So that plays a huge role in the plot itself, because when Luke gets captured, there's a bunch of these salamander creatures around, so he can't use the Force. He can't use Force tricks on people's minds, or use it to like summon his lightsaber to his hand. He can't do any of that, which I think is maybe a little bit of a cop out. Like, why introduce this really cool magic system or really cool Force, and then take? But it makes sense for the story to happen. It makes sense, and that's kind of Thrawn's whole thing. He basically has a ship full of these things now, where it inhibits the use of the Force. And I'm sure it'll play a bigger role later in the trilogy. But that was a cool introduction, I think, even if I think it's maybe a little convenient and cheesy. Again, convenient being kind of the key word here for this review. And I think with Kabath, I think he could be really interesting too. Again, he's a Force user. He was using electricity Force at Thrawn, and then Thrawn had the lizard around his neck, and then the electricity just dissipated, and the Force didn't work against him. So again, I think there were cool story moments using the lizards and using the Force. And we did explore a couple new planets, new battle station, things like that. So we're kind of a reminder that this isn't a huge galaxy. It's like we're not sticking to Hoth, we're not sticking to Tatooine, we're not sticking to Coruscant. I mean, you do kind of visit a couple of those, but the galaxy is bigger than what we saw in the movies, right? So I think that's really cool that we got to explore some of that. So yeah. Anyway, Heir to the Empire, Thrawn Trilogy, book number 1. I rated 7.06 out of 10. So what do you guys think? Have you guys read Thrawn Trilogy? Did you guys enjoy it? Have you ignored it because it's Star Wars and you don't really care for Star Wars? I get that. I respect that. I kind of rolled my eye. I probably wouldn't have read it if I didn't get it at a book sale for so cheap, honestly. But I am glad I read it, and I am excited to get into book number 2 that I might get into March. We will see. So anyway, if you guys enjoy this review or enjoy the book, please hit like down below. If you guys want to see more from me, Diggerdan, please hit that subscribe button as well as that bell notification icon so you guys know when I upload each and every single time. And I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.